Let's welcome Stephanie Cheryl Haibloom aboard.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar on video games. My name is Dr. Stephanie Haibloom, and I will be going over some video gaming basics with you, as well as how to apply these basics with your clients. Knowing more about video games and video gaming culture will enable you to better establish rapport with clients that are a part of this culture. Being culturally sensitive to a client's subculture is just as important as being culturally sensitive to the client's main culture. And it can also help a client to feel more at ease discussing this part of themselves. It enables you to speak to parents knowledgeably about the world that their children are living in, or for somebody who it's their significant other or spouse, the world that they're living in, and that these people may have very little understanding of. So as you can see, we have some myths and misconceptions in front of us. These are all pretty much the same types of misconceptions that have been used in the past to vilify other media, such as comic books, movies, television, and even rock music back in the day. As for all video games being violent and/or sexual in nature, that is a misconception, as there are games aimed at children 6 and younger, as well as adults, and the content is extremely different for each age group. Any game that has any sexual content or is sexual in nature is rated M for mature, which means that it can only be sold to a player that is 17 years or older, similar to going to an R-rated movie. Games that show realistic violence are also rated M for mature. There are many games, though, out there that are non-violent, such as games that are purely exploration or puzzle-solving games, as well as most sports games. Playing a video game with violence in it has not been proven to cause violence in the player, and depending on the study, there has been found sometimes a correlation between violence in video games and aggression in players. However, we must keep in mind as clinicians that correlation is not causation. And as to the last 2 points on this slide, that games are only for children and only children play video games, you might find the next upcoming statistics interesting. As you can see, with the average age of gamers being 35, more adults are playing video games than children. And because of that, the market is obviously geared towards more adult video games. So we will see more of those types of games advertised than you will see games for children. That doesn't mean that games for children don't exist. They do. However, we need to keep in mind that since there are more adults that play video games than children, we may actually have adult clients that are being perceived as addicted to video games by their family or significant other. There are also more female video game players than people think. This is no longer a male-dominated area, and the games are actually starting to reflect that by having female protagonists in them that are strong female protagonists, and they are also drawn more realistically. The hours that I've listed there for gaming are for games that are being played per week. That statistic, however, does not list whether those hours of 6.5 or 5 are played in one day or spread out over a week. And there is especially one heartening statistic at the very end here that parents are becoming actually more involved with their children's gameplay by playing with their children, as opposed to just putting them in front of a game and leaving them by themselves. So, welcome to Video Gaming 101. Before we go into clinical applications, I'm going to take you through a crash course on video games. In this section, we will go over the basics to give you a more general understanding and overview of what your clients are spending so much time doing when they're not in the room with you. So, In front here is a list of popular terms that you may hear from your clients and some very basic explanations as to what they mean. So I'm going to go through them one at a time. A single-player game is a game that only one person plays. It is generally not an online game, and you don't generally play it with another person sitting next to you. A co-op game is a game that is played cooperatively with others as a team, either online or offline locally. And when I say offline locally, that's a bunch of people come into your home, all of the friends get together, they bring their gaming consoles, they bring their game controllers, and everybody plays the same game together as a team. An NPC is a non-player character. This is a character created by the game to help you advance in a quest, to give you a task to do, to have you talk to it for a clue. They perform different roles depending on what type of game they're actually in. Now, the FPS is something you'll probably hear a lot about because it's a very popular type of game. FPS, a first-person shooter, is talking about the point of view of the character you play as. A first-person shooter is a game where you are actually embodying the character or the avatar, if you will, of what is in the game. You don't actually see the body. It is basically the point of view as if you yourself are looking out of the character's eyes. A lot of people have a problem playing these games because with all of the movement, it can make them nauseous. But those that don't actually enjoy playing them. Now, as a subgenre, in a sense, to that term, there is something called a third-person shooter, and that is where the camera angle either has you looking down on the character you're playing from above, so you can see sort of overarching everything that's going on in the playing field, or you can look from behind the character as if you're looking over their shoulder. Either way, you do see the character that you've either created or that the game has created for you. The next term is an RPG. It's a role-playing game. If any of you have ever heard of Dungeons and Dragons, that's probably the original RPG. You create a character from the ground up by picking its height, its weight, its hair color, its gender, its age, what race it's going to be, what job or role, they are the same in a role-playing game, it will have, such as a mage, somebody who uses magic, a warrior, a fighter. It just kind of depends on the game as to what you're going to pick. DPS is damage per second. If you have a client that's playing a role-playing game and comes in and talks about, wow, my character does massive DPS, the client is basically saying, wow, my character is doing massive damage per second. When I hit a monster, I hit it hard. And a lot of players are very much into the fact that they can hit something hard and that they're strong. Depends on, obviously, on the player. An MMOG is a massive multiplayer online game that you don't have a specific role in. You just play a character that is already set up and you play it with thousands of other people online in this game that's on the internet generally. An MMORPG is a massive multiplayer online role-playing game where you take on that role of a character that you create from the ground up and you grow and level up and gain more abilities and strengths and skills as the game is played. Now, the games that generally take the most time to play are the MMORPGs, such as World of Warcraft, very popular one, Final Fantasy XIV, League of Legends, EVE Online, there are a lot of others. They take time because they have no actual end, as the developers are continually putting out new levels and story arcs. They also take a lot of time because they're often played with something called a guild, which is a group of players that have banded together to reach common goals. You'll hear me use that term later on in this webinar. The members of this guild may or may not be the people that your client knows outside of the game. And there could simultaneously be thousands of people playing in the same game at the same time, and your client may be playing with people from all over the world. This also constitutes your social and teamwork aspects that I'll talk about later on of the game. A PvP is player versus player. It happens in World of Warcraft as in other games, where two players face off against each other, generally fight to the death, and if agreed on beforehand, the losing player gives the other player some sort of gift, possibly something that's a weapon inside the game, money inside the game. WoW just stands for World of Warcraft. If you have a client that comes in and says, oh, I've been playing WoW all this time, now you know it's World of Warcraft. Platforming is a type of movement that's used in a lot of various games. It's all timing based, and you progress through hazardous terrain by jumping, climbing, leaping. You can think of it as doing log rolling, jumping from rooftop to rooftop at specific times, and you don't want your character to miss because generally the character is injured or dies. An open world game is, a lot of it is like WoW, World of Warcraft, and a lot of it is also found in other RPG games. It's a game in which the character exists in a huge playable area, and as the player, you can go off and explore all throughout the game, or you can just play the actual story of the game. You have a choice. It doesn't necessarily force you down a path like a lot of RPGs do. So the genres here are very basic ones, and they tend to cross over one another and create multiple subgenres. So I've basically listed the most basic ones here for you with very basic explanations. An action game, think of something like Pong. The action is to keep the ball in motion. The one who drops it least ends up winning the game. A shooter, just like it says, you shoot your enemies to either win or further the story. They can cross over into adventure games and action adventure games, where you might have to shoot something and then solve a puzzle, platform across some logs or from tree to tree. It varies. But I just want to give you sort of an idea as to how these games are, in a sense, constructed. An adventure game, like it says, you solve puzzles, you talk to NPCs. You will talk to NPCs also in action adventure games, sometimes in shooters, and a lot of times in role-playing games. So you can see how things cross over with each other. We pretty much discussed role-playing games. Then when I talk about choosing a role with certain skills and deficits, it's like basically being a human being. It's being in another world. So you choose a role such as, let's say for instance, a healer. You're the one in the party that heals everybody else, but your deficits, so to speak, are that you are not skilled in fighting, so you need to be protected. It's basically an offset. You may be great at healing, but you're not very good with a sword. Your simulation games are games such as Sims or Civilization, where it actually simulates the real world, but on a computer or on a game machine. Strategy games, think of things like chess or Risk. You have to focus on strategy to actually win the game. In sports games, they're pretty self-explanatory. You're playing sports and helping your team to win. Casual games are things like Words with Friends, Candy Crush, a trivia game. They're little tiny games that don't take too long to play. So here we've got some examples of video game genres where I've listed some of the more popular titles so that you can have an idea of what is on the market that your clients may play. What I would encourage you all to do is to go online to youtube.com and to actually look up gameplay for some of the games listed here, as well as go to the ESRB, which is the Electronic Software Ratings Board, to look at the ratings for the games. It will allow you to get a better idea of what the games look like as they're being played, and to see the ratings. It allows you to see that if the rating is actually age appropriate for your client. If you've got a 10-year-old client and they're playing something like God of War, which is absolutely an M-rated game, you may want to actually talk to the parent and see what's going on and why they're buying their children a game that's not really appropriate for a 10-year-old. So playing video games, as we all know, has both pros and cons. So I'm going to start by talking about the pros. In certain games, such as World of Warcraft, you play in a guild, like I mentioned before. Everyone has a role, or you can think of a role as a job to do. And if someone does not do their job or does not perform their role well, the guild could fail in whatever their objective is, and everyone's progress could be lost. Basically, because games like that, if you die, you basically come back, but you come back at the very beginning of where you started. You don't come back right to where you died. So any progress you made, and certainly any items you may have been given from the game, could be lost. So this is where the teamwork and the commitment to others that I'm talking about, where the clients may learn these things, actually come into play. And social activity comes into play as well, because they're playing these games with other human beings and interacting with them on a social level. Other games that you don't necessarily play as a team, but perhaps by yourself, have the player make very difficult moral choices that affect the game throughout the rest of the gameplay, which is where your critical thinking comes into play. When you talk about, well, I have to make a decision, a lot of games have a decision tree. And it's, do I send this character out on what could be a mission that kills them? Do I send this character out and maybe they don't come back and I lose a character? How will doing this or having this type of behavior actually affect my gameplay further down the line? And the same games that have the critical thinking a lot of times also have the puzzle solving. While there's also recently been a meta-analysis, because it's been in the news, that showed a correlation between violent video games and aggressive behavior, I'd like to say again that we need to remember that correlation is not causation, and there have been recent studies that show the opposite. So some of these studies I've listed where they're showing immoral behavior in game actually may elicit pro-social behavior out of the game. So they're not aggressive, they feel bad about what they did in-game and have more pro-social behavior outside of the game. And another study that showed that game playing for a Mario Brothers game, which is what they used in that particular study by Kuhn, Gleach, Lorenz, Lindenberger, and Gallinat in 2014, actually affected the brain plasticity and increased the growth of gray matter. So what I feel we really need to do is to have more studies and better studies, as even this research as well as the meta-analysis did say that they found flaws in each of their research. So on to the cons of video gaming. There have been studies that show that too much gaming may lead to obesity, and as with anything, too much of anything can be unhealthy. There needs to be a balance of gameplay with real-world activities, such as going outside for a walk, meeting with friends, time with family, whatever. Some form of exercise is still needed so that the player themselves, they don't spend all of their time sitting on the couch with a bag of chips and ending up becoming overweight from it. If it's a child, this is a parenting issue. So parents need to make sure that their children are getting exercise, and also the parents need to make sure that children are playing games that are age appropriate for them. The ratings for any game are generally found on the front of the game, so the parent really just needs to look. Now, as with any online activity, anonymity can breed bullying. And people that are bullied in real life may become bullies to relieve that feeling of helplessness and loss of control in their own lives from being bullied. So now we're going to go into gameplay times. A lot of times is what you're going to hear is the parent will bring a child in and say, my kid plays this game for X amount of hours on a Saturday or on this many days, and they're spending too long. I think they're addicted. Knowing how long games generally can last, and the times and examples I've listed are not in a single sitting. They're over days, weeks, months, however long it takes to play the game. It would give you a better idea to be able to give that parent a better idea of what the reality is of the gameplay time. So if we think of a game that has an engaging storyline as you would a good book, people have tended in forever to get lost in a good book and spend an entire day reading it. The same could be said of a game with an engaging storyline. Generally, your action-adventure games are like that. They're like a movie. You're the protagonist, you're watching the movie unfold, and you don't want to necessarily stop the story because it's so interesting you want to see what happens next. For RPGs, role-playing games, like I said before, they can be very open world, where you can explore without focusing on a main storyline. And if you think of this, it's an alternate world with a wide variety of things you can do, and non-player characters, NPCs, that you can engage with, many of whom, like I said before, will give you tasks to do and quests to perform. It's sort of if you took a stroll down the block, and as you're walking down your block, you help your neighbor mow the lawn. You keep walking after that, and you come across another neighbor whose cat is stuck in a tree, and you help them. These are the little quests and side stories that you could be given. You may not get to the store right away if you want to think of that as the main point of the story, but you do other things off on the side. MMORPGs have new content added regularly, and the social aspect of playing with other people, live human beings that they can talk to, can also create an even more engaging experience than just watching a story unfold. This is why MMORPGs are listed at 1,000+ hours. People don't just play World of Warcraft, I've done this level, I've done this section, I'm done, and put it away. They play these things for years. And the friendships that they create with the people online are just as real to them as friendships that they would create with live people out of the game. So we've gone over the timing. Now we're going to go over how games are sort of saved or not saved and played. So some games can be saved at any point in the gameplay, and others you can only do it at something called a save spot. So when a parent tells their child, or a wife tells their husband, or a husband tells his wife, turn it off now, it may be impossible for them to do so without losing progress. I like to explain it as, think of yourself as being at work in an office. You work on an Excel spreadsheet for the past 3 hours, but you haven't saved it yet. The boss comes in, demands you stop your work, and you say, well, let me save this. They say no, and they turn off your computer. Since you haven't saved in 3 hours, all of that hard work of yours is lost. I want you to think about how you would feel if someone did that to you. And now that is how a gamer would feel when somebody unplugs or turns off the game before they can save. This isn't for every single game, though. A simple game of Candy Crush may take no more than 5 minutes to get through a level, and you're done. And the progress is automatically saved. You're finished. However, in some adventure games, the player could take an hour or more just to find the save point. And if they don't save, well, that hour or more is wasted time for them because they haven't been able to save their progress. Now, while people play WoW for thousands of hours on end, you can leave a game like WoW at any time during your gameplay. However, doing so may put your in-game companions at risk for dying and losing their progress. Remember, before I spoke about teamwork and a guild. If your guild with you in it and you're the healer and you're in the middle of a battle, you can't just leave the game because without the healer, everybody dies. So therefore, players will generally stick it out with the companions, and those are the games that get played for hours and hours and hours. So when parents complain about a teen playing for hours, or a spouse complains about a spouse playing for hours, finding out what game is being played is a good idea, because then you'll know how easy it is to save and exit and be able to educate the parent or the significant other about it. You could say, well, I see that you're telling me so-and-so is playing World of Warcraft. If they're in a battle right now and they're needed, they need to actually commit to that commitment and stay with their team until it's done. Then they can actually leave the game and come back and spend time with the family. So now we're going to go over the application of all of these basics that we just learned. So here we're talking about a study that I mentioned earlier where they found that virtual violence may increase prosocial behavior. The takeaway here is that for most clients, immoral actions in a game may elicit guilt in the client, which in turn may elicit more prosocial behavior out of the game. I put this here because this actually goes against the violent video games make people aggressive line of thought. So while we did have that meta-analysis, here's one study that comes out against it. And this is telling you a little more about that particular study, where the students were randomly assigned to either play a first-person shooter game as a terrorist, play it as a UN soldier, or not play the game at all and just recall a memory of something they did in the past that had made them feel guilty. What was found was that those participants that played as the terrorist felt significantly more guilt than either the participants that played as the UN soldier. Both the UN soldier and the participants were shooting at people. I believe the terrorists were shooting at civilians and the UN soldiers were shooting at the terrorists. But both of them actually had more guilt than people that just did something in life that made them feel guilty and then were asked to recall that. So while the researchers felt this was a positive correlation that showed that prosocial behavior may be the consequence of guilt derived from virtual bad behaviors in video games, they also called for more studies to be done. So how to actually use this in session. Talk to your client about their choices in game. Have them explore if the choices that they make are based on character expectations or on something in themselves. My husband played Dragon Age, and he chose to play it as a character that was a dwarf. And some of the choices he made in the game, I actually asked him, are you doing this because of what the character is, that it's a dwarf and you feel they would act that way based on the mythos in the game, or are you playing the game as you and this is what you would do? He actually had to think about it and eventually said, I think it might be a little bit of both. Some of them are the moral choices I would make as myself, and some of these choices are choices I believe the character would make as the character. But it's an interesting way to look at things and to learn more about the client. You know, what they like about the video game and why they like it can say a lot about a client. You know, you can explore their choices and likes as a way to also get them to open up more in session. So if I've got a teenager in front of me who may not want to talk a lot, but I know that they're into a specific video game, I will ask them about that game, such as, oh, well, I heard, you said that you're in League of Legends. So I know that's based on superheroes and people with powers. So tell me about your character. What's the character like? What's the superhero power they have? Why did you make that choice? It can tell you a lot about the client themselves as to what their choices are. So a healer, a magic user, a race, you can choose in different games to be an elf, a human, a barbarian, an orc. It just really depends on the game. And you can ask why you chose that particular race. Why did you choose to be a healer? What does that say, about the client? And also, if they're in a guild, why did they choose that guild? What drew them to it? What do they like about it? And maybe even what don't they like about it? It's very interesting to hear what the client likes and doesn't like, and the aspects of the game. They like the shooting part, the fighting part, the artwork. There are all many different aspects of different video games that one can choose from to ask your client about. So like anything else, when we look for a pathology, the main thrust that we look at is how is it impacting the client's life. When a parent comes in and says, my kid is addicted to video games, they play every Saturday from noon to 6. They're obviously addicted. It's time to also then ask the parent, so how's their social life? How are they doing in school? If it's an adult, do they have a job? How is their job? Are they happy at their job? How's the home life? It lets you know if there's something that the person is trying to escape from. How are their intimate relationships? Do they have any? If any of these are negatively impacted, yes, there may be too much gaming in the client's life. However, if the parent brings in their child, complains about them being addicted to a video game, and their answer to all of these questions is, oh, well, yes, my child plays video games from noon to 6 every Saturday, but they have a girlfriend, they hang out with their friends, they're a straight A student, captain of the football team, part of the choir at church, and we see him every day for dinner. That is not necessarily an addicted kid. That's a parent who needs to be educated so that they can help change their perceptions as to how much is too much. And into video game addiction, so as we have instruments such as an ASI, which is an alcohol severity index to assess whether or not somebody is an alcoholic, there is no such instrument to assess game addiction, nor even a widely accepted definition as to what even constitutes a game addiction. Going back to how much is too much, what is a perception, what is reality. I've put up here The criteria for possible addiction, that could be an addiction to anything, not necessarily video games. But we can look at these basics and be open to it as also being the perception of the parent or significant other of the client by asking them, how preoccupied are they with the game? If you tell them they can't play the game, do they become angered, enraged, tearful? Are they playing more now than they have been before? Has there been an increase in the time they spend playing it? Have they tried to stop playing and been unsuccessful in either stopping or cutting back on their hours? And what is that, if depending on the game? If they're involved in World of Warcraft with a guild, they may need to communicate better with significant others and family as to, I need to schedule this much time to be with my guild to play it on this day. Are they lying about playing? Once again, is this impacting life and relationships? Is somebody that should be working sitting at home playing a video game? That's a problem. And why? Why are they playing these games so much? Are they playing to escape? Are they depressed? What's actually really going on? So we want to help them perhaps cut back on playing if it is a negative impact in their life, and bring that balance back again, where they do spend more time with family and friends and less time on the video game. This could mean a contract where you spend X amount of time on gameplay, so you get 2 hours to play a game, you need 2 hours of socializing outside of the game, or going out to exercise, spend time with your family, do homework, look for a job, whatever. But it might be a way to step them through and start to wean them down from a lot of gameplay. So perception again. This means talking to the client's parents or significant other about how much time the client spends playing video games and how it's impacting them. It also means talking to the client and seeing if they actually think this is a bad impact on their life. It sort of depends. As you know, the client may not see a problem with it while others do. You can also bring into the discussion what you've learned now about how long certain games take to play. So is the client playing an MMORPG? Then you need to explain to the client and the parents or significant others how to communicate with each other about plans they want to make. Nobody lives in a vacuum in a family system. If the client needs to have X amount of time on this day to play this game, then they need to talk to the other people in the family and say, this is what I need. Do we have plans that day? Just as the people who may want to make plans would have to say, we want to make plans this day for that time. Do you have any plans to be on your video game, with your friends in the guild? A give and take there. And also explain to the parents and significant others that MMORPGs, by their very nature, can take a long time to play, and that's why the client may need to block out some time to play it. But make sure that the client understands they have a responsibility to their families and to their relationships as well. And when they're not playing any type of video game, whether it's WoW with other friends in a guild or just a single player game, they need to be there and present when they are not playing and be there with their friends and their parents, their significant others, and not have their head in the game. Help the parent to recognize, or the significant other to recognize, that your client, their teen or their person, may be playing a game such as World of Warcraft, and that both the parent and teen or significant other and spouse need to talk to each other about scheduling. Regardless of the game being played, if it's a parent, have the parent include outside physical activity as part of the contract with the teen. Play 4 hours of World of Warcraft after homework is done, go out, get some exercise, do things with the family, etc. Once you explain how games work and how they can take several hours to play, it may help the parent see that their teen's not necessarily addicted, but needs help with time management and prioritizing. Same with an adult client. Having the parent or SO talk to their teen or to that client about game playing and time management is also a good way to have them open up a dialogue instead of just shutting them down and going, no more games, and that's because I said so. So we need to recognize that the client is not just going to stop playing video games, and technology and video games are endemic in our society. I've always felt the best way to not have an addicted, in quotes, child is to not start them very young on video games and to help them socialize in public places instead of handing them a device to watch. However, if a client is addicted to a video game, we need to help bring them more real-life activities and bring them back into balance. Talking with them about what the game helps them with and why could also be very powerful. Help them to realize their own power outside of that game and help teach them positive coping strategies that don't involve using video games. Depending on what the client is going through, you may need to do some family therapy, as helping a client and putting them back in a broken system could trigger old behaviors. Now, in my full 3-hour workshop on this subject, I show a short film called Escape. It's by Baruch Films, and that's spelled B-A-R-U-C-H. You can look it up on YouTube.com. It's about a 9 or 10-minute film. It's about a young girl who's ostracized in school and has an abusive home life, and her only feelings of worth and empowerment are through her video game. It's extremely powerful, and I do highly recommend you watch it. So finally, here's the ESRB ratings. They're extremely useful to have when you're talking to parents and you want to discuss what's appropriate for their children. These can be found on www.esrb.org, and I believe that this particular webinar will be left up for 72 hours, so you should be able to go back and look at it and maybe get a screenshot just of the ratings this way, or go to the website so you have something that you can actually give parents when you talk to them. I've included a short list of other websites that you can go to yourself or send parents to for more information on specific video games. And I've also listed different video game magazines on here for either you to review or to suggest for parents to review. Pretty much all of these magazines, as well as the websites, give them more information about the video games and their ratings. And in case you need it, I do have my references there.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was a very interesting sessions, and thank you, audience. Now we have questions for all of the people who have joined the seminar for you, and I request everyone you can use the chat box if you have any questions. Now, Stephanie, I'm going to bring up the first question that is from Victoria. Now, she says that she's looking for ways to guide children towards games that emphasize learning, like, for example, tricking them so that they can think they are having fun, but they are really enhancing their knowledge. So what do you have to say about this?
That's a great idea. Excellent. It's going to depend on the age of the child, but I would highly recommend to Victoria to actually go to some of those websites that I had put up, and like I said, should still be up for the next 3 days, and look for games. There are educational games, but there are other games such as the Professor Layton games that are played on a handheld Nintendo DS or 3DS. They're little handheld consoles that a lot of kids have. And in those games, you have to look for clues to solve mysteries. I'd also talk to the child and see what it is the child is interested in for gameplay, as well as what consoles they have at home. You don't want to recommend an Xbox game for a kid that's got a PlayStation 4 it just won't work. They're two different systems. It's sort of like offering to play a Mac thing on a PC. It won't work. So finding out those types of details, I think, would be very helpful to you. Hopefully I've answered that question.
Thank you so much. Now, Stephanie, the second question is from Dave Berry. He says that, in my experience, parents of teens who are raising the issue of gaming have had a long history of upholding healthy boundaries. And he's suggesting the implementations of boundaries is very difficult. So, do you have any tips or strategy for addressing healthy boundaries with uh, with uh, with these parents or families?
So basically, it sounds like what you're saying is the parents don't have a good track record of having good boundaries with the kids, and therefore now that they're teenagers, they're having an even more difficult time. It's hard. It may not be where you can absolutely say this is the strict boundary, but perhaps talk to the child or the teen, talk to the parent, and get them to do a contractual agreement. So you're setting the boundary, but you're setting a boundary in an essence where there's some compromise on either side. I had to do this for little kids when I was in my practicum, where we set a contract where, child A had to put their clothes away at night and not leave them on the floor. And what that child wanted out of mom was, mom doesn't yell so much, because the yelling and the raised voice upset the child. So it's got to be some give and take in there. The same with the video games, give and take. You want to play, oh, I don't know, I'll go with things I know. You want to play Dragon Age, that's fine, but you can only play it X amount of time on these days after conditions have been met, which is do your homework. So homework is done, you get 2 hours playing Dragon Age. And I will allow you some extra time so that you're able to save your progress. And mom will be understanding of that it takes time to get through a level and save progress. So hopefully that was good and helped.
Yes, it was very helpful. Thank you. Now, audience, you can still continue to put your question on the chat box. And now we have another question coming for you, Stephanie, which is
Mm-hmm.
from Marian. And she has to say that, do you have recommendations for books that offers a non-religious model of recovery for individuals who are addicted to online gaming?
A book. I've not seen any. I've not seen any non-religious models in a book or religious models in a book on video game addiction in general. This whole workshop that I've done and this little webinar came about more because I play video games, my friends play them, my husband plays them, and I guess in my own way, I don't like to see them villainized all the time, that everybody that plays a video game is going to be aggressive and violent. So I wanted to put more knowledge out there about it. I look at recovery of somebody who's addicted to playing video games the same way I would look at recovery from drugs or from alcohol, which is where I have my background in that. And I applied those same basic principles. The difference, I would say, is while drugs you could overdose on, alcohol could eventually kill you sometime sooner if you're driving drunk and have an accident, a video game isn't necessarily going to take your life or the life of another person. So I look at it more as a harm reduction and try to get them to cut back as opposed to you must be abstinent. like I said, I've never actually done any recovery of addiction or anything from a religious standpoint, so I've never seen anything on that. I usually have done the AA model or a harm reduction model, and that would be dependent on my client.
All right, thank you. And then, Stephanie, we have a question from Jason. Uh, he wrote, we just launched a program called Unplugged to treat this addiction in our wilderness therapy program. So we have seen a good results in the adolescents in our program, but would like to give you more support to parents. Are there any national support groups you recommend?
None that I've seen actually, but I think that's just an amazing idea. I love that. And I think also giving the parents knowledge and empowering them, letting them know about the ESRB ratings, because you're going to get kids, just like with anything, they want to be the cool kid, and they're going to want the cool video game, whether it's appropriate for them or not. Empowering the parents and educating them on how much is too much, on how to set the boundaries, on creating a contract and an open dialogue with their children to talk about why you can't have that video game because I don't feel it's appropriate. Let's see what else that you may like and find something as a compromise is great. For the parents that have the addicted children, maybe starting something along the lines of an Al-Anon for the parents would be a good idea, and using that as a model in creating that type of a grouping. But I haven't seen anything um, actually nationwide or otherwise that says we support parents with addicted kids. Now you've got me wanting to go do research, so good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And audience, we are ending the sessions. So if you have any further question, you can feel free to write to us at ceu@sohealth.com or webinar@sohealth.com. And thank you, audience, and Stephanie once again for participating in the webinar. All participants will need to sign up for the Sovereign Health Continuing Education Program. So you can also visit us at http://www.sovinstitute.com. Stephanie's presentations will be available to watch after 72 hours. You will receive an email with all the information pertaining to this webinar and on how you can learn one free continuing education soon. Thank you.